It's 1999, the cusp of a new century. Globally, the telecommunications sector was being revolutionized with rapid developments in technology, making it easier and cheaper to communicate. But in the OECS, it appeared the telecommunications sector was stuck in time. The price of telephone calls were high and continuously on the increase. Internet service was unreliable, slow, and inefficient. The monopoly service provider appeared to care very little about customer service, and many believe was indifferent to the needs of an OECS economy transforming from agriculture to services. The only service provider then was Cable and Wireless. It held total control over the telecommunications sector in the OECS. Economic fortunes were changing in the agriculture-based economies of the islands. There was talk of economic diversification away from agriculture and into services, and telecommunications was one area under consideration. On the urging of the World Bank and as a consequence of new World Trade Organization rules, the islands were forced to think seriously of a telecommunications reform and the establishment of a unit to explore those issues.
When the government decided to, on the initiative of the government in St. Lucia, to start this project, I was chosen to head the reform process in terms of the unit, and that was being placed at the OECS headquarters in the trade economic section. Initially, the project was to deal with economic diversification, of which telecom reform was a part of.
In addition, pressure was being added by the WTO against unfair trade, and so monopolies could not be protected, as was evident elsewhere.
Internationally, the whole trend towards breaking up of monopolies, the Bells and the AT&T and demonopolization process had already started, the Telecom Act in the US.
And so liberalization became inevitable. Something had to be done to liberalize the telecommunications sector, the only area where a monopoly existed.
The governments took a decision that there was a need to liberalize the sector. The sector had to be open. They looked at all the problems faced in the ICT agenda, trying to get things done, and high cost of telecom services, access to telecom services, which is, even if you were willing to pay the high prices, you still couldn't get some of the services you want.
For the services sector to develop in the OECS, the cost of telecommunications had to be brought down significantly, and new technology and services introduced as rapidly as possible. This was not happening under Cable and Wireless. Fast forward to 2010. Jamail Daniel is the managing director of The Cell, a chain of stores throughout the OECS, offering a range of service from telephone handsets and repairs to accessories and software upgrades for cell phones. Keitha Glass has a web consulting service offering business solutions utilizing online applications, e-marketing, and website development. Her clients and staff work from locations as far away as India and the Philippines. Keitha works from a virtual office which can be anywhere thanks to rapid developments in telecommunications technology. These are business opportunities made possible through the liberalization of the telecommunications sector. But liberalization did not happen overnight. It may have begun in Dominica in the early 90s when a local entrepreneur named Ron Abraham, who owned a company called Marpin, took constitutional action against the state after his company was denied a telecommunications license. The lawyers for Marpin argued that the refusal of the Marpin application was a violation of the constitutional right to freedom of expression. This was the first legal challenge to the monopoly held by Cable and Wireless, and this gave OECS leaders added momentum to pursue the liberalization of the telecommunications sector.
We in Dominica actually pioneered some of this because we had this company called Mappin that wanted to offer phone service, and with a little bit of foresight, our government did allow Mappin, that's before Ectel, to offer phone service. And that was the impetus in some ways for the World Bank to come in and fund a regional regulatory authority.
The process to liberalization of the telecommunications sector had begun. It was not difficult to convince the public of the need to break the monopoly held by Cable and Wireless.
The price of telephone communications was prohibitive. People forget that to call Sophia or Viewford required a long distance call. Also required a fee to receive a cell phone call.
There was no doubt in anybody's mind that it was time for competition.
Because the general approach worldwide was towards deregulation. And the idea that you can have a monopoly in the telecommunications sector was becoming unpopular.
Coincidentally, a few of the licenses to Cable and Wireless were expiring and due for renewal. The St. Lucia government saw this as an opportunity to negotiate an end to the monopoly.
And in one case, the license was going to expire in 2020 and in another 2024. Fortunately, in the case of St. Lucia, the license was due to expire in 2000, and then Prime Minister Kenny Anthony decided he would not negotiate with Cable and Wireless alone, but he would do this together with the OECS. And that, together with the World Bank, provided an opportunity for liberalization of the sector.
So we knew that we were in a position at that time to compel some renegotiations.
This viewpoint was further endorsed and encouraged by the Marpin Challenge to Cable and Wireless in Dominica. This development highlighted the vulnerabilities of the monopoly giant.
And I think the Marpin decision and also the whole legal issue with Marpin raised clearly to Cable and Wireless that they could not continue to do business as usual. They could not continue to rely on what they thought was a strong legal position. Really and truly, it was no longer a tenable legal position for Cable and Wireless.
The Privy Council did not uphold the case of Marpin, but remitted the case to the High Court, requesting the High Court to determine whether a monopoly was reasonably required in the public interest. And once the court had taken that position, then basically it really meant that the assault had commenced on Cable and Wireless.
Dr. Anthony decided that a unified approach was the only way to effectively liberalize the telecommunications sector. But he met some lukewarm responses.
Antigua suggested that they had different arrangements. The government of St. Kitts conceded some support, but a little timid at the time. And it's only later I found out that the timidity had to do with the fact that they had shares in Cable and Wireless in St. Kitts. Grenada was a little timid too, and then I found out too that the Grenada government also had some stake in the sector at the time in Grenada. The most enthusiastic supporter was Dominica and St. Vincent.
Eventually, 5 OECS islands agreed to engage Cable and Wireless on the future of the telecommunications sector. They were Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. A monopoly was undesirable for islands which badly needed a reliable, affordable, and modern telecommunications sector to transform their economies from a heavy reliance on agriculture to one based on services and information and communication technology. And so the fight for the liberalization of the telecommunications sector began. Enter Calix George, St. Lucia's Minister of Communications, who was charged with the responsibility of leading the OECS delegation into negotiations with Cable and Wireless.
I think the presence of Minister George at the time, being very forceful personality as he was, I think brought a bit of a shocker to Cable and Wireless. It shocked them into understanding that, listen, this was a sort of very equal playing field. We were not here on our knees trying to get what we could from you, but we were sovereign governments negotiating with you.
Calix George is an avowed anti-monopolist. He doesn't like monopolies, and also he had a passion for the region.
We were very, very concerned, for example, of the use of the big stick. You know, the big stick approach, we are the big boys.
No one really knew how the unprecedented fight with Cable and Wireless was going to play out. both sides prepared for a protracted legal battle.
Perhaps the most significant issue there was Cable and Wireless requesting a really very, very large sum of money, 97 million US if I remember, to forego its exclusive licenses. And these negotiations were sometimes very difficult, but in the end there was an arrangement which was satisfactory to all parties.
Cable and Wireless was, of course, very haughty. Typical colonial attitudes. They virtually believed that they could fool us again.
And they were just being recalcitrant and obtuse. And generally speaking, very unhelpful. They were a monopoly, and like all monopolies, did not want to relinquish their position of strength and indeed power within the telecommunication system. But they were fighting a battle of the 20th century.
Our position was also that constitutionally, Cable and Wireless could not maintain a monopoly, and we were prepared, if need be, to go into litigation on that question ourselves.
It was critical that the OECS acted as one in the looming battle with Cable and Wireless, and the first test of the resolve of the islands came when word spread that Cable and Wireless would pull out of St. Lucia. It was a cause for major concern.
The company has agreed to meet with the OECS heads on February 21st in an attempt to reach an understanding on the outstanding issues. It was a little unnerving, though I had expected it, because almost immediately the employees of Cable and Wireless began to agitate. I want to urge you, the workers of Cable and Wireless, not to allow yourselves to be used against the interest of your country.
The threat of pulling out from St. Lucia jolted other OECS leaders who got the news during a CARICOM meeting in Barbados. But the threat only served to solidify the pact against the monopolistic giant.
Touch one, touch all was the code that we used in those discussions. So I was able to mobilize support from the governments, and those who were initially timid, I think, came around. And I think when Cable and Wireless realized that we were able to secure the support of the other governments, they backed off somewhat.
The negotiations with Cable and Wireless continued. It got heated, always with an expectation that somehow it would end in litigation and eventually resolved at the Privy Council. But the decision in the Marpin Challenge was a reminder to both sides that taking this battle to court was probably the least attractive option at this time.
We actually ended up in court only once, so that was not too bad a record for the traumatic experience of, in the Caribbean, facing the prospect of the loss of exclusivity.
ECTEL was established, we will remember, because the signatory governments were desirous of creating a competitive environment for telecoms in our region. We wanted, of course, the benefits of universal telecommunication services to be realized by the people of this region.
It was the dawn of a new era for the OECS. The dismantling of a telecommunications monopoly was unprecedented. The Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority, ECTEL, was established on 4th May 2000 by a treaty signed in St. George's, Grenada. The exclusive arrangement for Cable and Wireless to be the sole provider of telecommunications services had come to an end. In its place, a new structure had emerged to regulate the telecommunications sector in the OECS.
ECTEL was unique in the sense that it provided a home for the technical and legal expertise which individually the islands did not have.
ECTEL would now manage the telecommunications sector through a new regulatory arrangement. It became the regional umbrella organization, with each ECTEL member state establishing a National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission, or NTRC. The World Bank, which had been supportive of a liberalized telecommunications sector, provided the initial funding of $6 million for the establishment of ECTEL.
There's no way in which we could have done it by ourselves. So the World Bank provided a lot of the financial resources for us to have meetings, for us to have discussions with other people, other parts of the world.
With ECTEL firmly established, came the rush of telecommunications companies to the region. AT&T, Orange Communications, Digicel, Flow, and there were others positioning to offer a range of telecommunications services in a post-monopoly era. At the top of the organizational structure is a council of ministers, comprising ministers of telecommunications from the ECTEL member states of Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Lucia. The council sets policy guidelines and directions for ECTEL, the OECS regulatory authority. ECTEL was established to ensure there was competition in the telecommunications sector, promote the harmonization of telecommunications policies and practices through member states, operate a universal service regime to ensure the widest possible access to service, facilitate fair pricing through the use of cost-based pricing methods, oversee fair competition, and ensure the continuous introduction of advanced technology and an increased range of services. ECTEL would also see that the public interest and national security were preserved, that high standards are maintained, and that the telecommunications sector facilitated the sustainable development of the OECS member states. The National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission, NTRC, operates at the local level with the following functions ascribed to it.
We are there to ensure that that progress continues. We are there to ensure that we get more modern services, we get more services based on a reasonable price, that the quality of service you get as a customer is of a high quality.
The NTRC advises the Minister of Telecommunications on the formulation of national policy and is responsible for technical regulation and the maintenance of high standards of service. The NTRC would also plan, supervise, regulate, and manage the use of the radio frequency spectrum in conjunction with ECTEL. The spectrum would include frequencies used in the remote keyless remotes for cars to FM and AM frequencies for radio stations. This spectrum monitoring unit ensures all radio stations operate legally.
We have a database of licensed persons and we have their frequencies. So we have equipment, we go out in the field and we monitor the frequencies to ensure that they are complying with the terms of their licenses.
Radio frequencies also involve what we take for granted, such as the remote controls for toy cars or televisions. The NTRC's list of functions also includes the regulation of prices for telecommunication services, the receipt and review of applications for licenses, ensuring that licensees comply with prescribed conditions, the review of proposed interconnection agreements with telecommunications service providers, and the investigation and resolution of complaints and conflicts. There is also provision for the establishment and management of a Universal Service Fund.
The Universal Service Fund has the potential to enhance the lives of many people and to further increase the contribution of telecommunications to economic development. This therefore creates a good opportunity for the NTRC to enhance its profile as a national institution.
It is a facility that you've heard that will fund the extension of telecom services to geographic areas that may not be financially attractive to telecoms providers. This fund then will ensure a more equitable distribution of telecom services throughout our Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. And this, of course, is only fair.
Thanks to the NTRCs, the public now has a voice on pricing and quality. Persons with complaints about the service of the telecommunication service providers can call the NTRCs, who will in turn do a thorough investigation of the complaint and the required follow-up to ensure satisfactory outcomes for the customer and the provider. the NTRCs have been given the task of ensuring that all service providers meet internationally accepted standards for service.
For example, you paying for internet service. If your internet is down 3 out of 5 days, it's an issue. The providers have to send us quality reports in which they specify what are their faults, their time, the downtime for those faults, and what measures they've taken to address those faults.
The telecommunications landscape has changed dramatically since liberalization in 2000.
But I am proud of what we have achieved so far as small island developing states. That people can look at Airtel today and be satisfied that the combination of the islands of the Airtel member states have done remarkably well on the world stage.
It's an incredible revolution. It occurred so quickly. Once liberalization came, then nearly every St. Lucian is walking around with a cell phone.
Our national economies have benefited quite a lot. People, it has really enhanced social interaction and social mobility. People have been able to use telephone. It has no doubt benefited small businesses, enhanced small businesses. In the education sector, people would do their research a lot faster, school children and so on. Consultants doing research, you could Google anything. It has really contributed to the spread of knowledge. Enhance people's capacity to learn and to be in touch with the world.
Look at the rates that we were paying for phone calls.
Our rates, we think still that they're a bit too high. But when you compare them to the rates in the United States and in Canada and some of the world and parts of Europe, our rates are quite reasonable when you look at the customer base.
Between 2004 and 2005, at the height of the build-out, of the rollout of new services, the investment in St. Lucia alone, we're not talking about the other 4 Airtel states, is in the region of 100 million Eastern Caribbean dollars. So 100 million Eastern Caribbean dollars. And from that time, 2004 to now, every year, the telecom sector has contributed upwards of 10% to our GDP.
Most schools have an internet lab, so children can do their research. You look at hospitals, they have a robust telephone and internet infrastructure in terms of how they communicate, whether internally or externally.
Airtel insists upon treating the OECS as a single market. And that benefits Dominica tremendously. Instead of 70,000 people, you're dealing with 500,000 people.
The liberalization of the telecommunications sector allowed competition, which has resulted in lower costs and the constant introduction of modern technology. Since liberalization, hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested in the development of telecommunications services, and today there is a solid platform which facilitates e-commerce and opens up many business opportunities for young entrepreneurs.
It's a very stable business, it was a very strong opportunity, and with that, employment was created for, if I have to look out throughout the region, 50 plus employees throughout the region. And that trickles down to their families, it trickles to taxes and the NIC contributions.
Everybody knows that people are working more just on their smartphone. My management style has changed because of Blackberries, iPhones, etc.
It's been 10 years since liberalization, and in spite of the remarkable achievements, there is still much to be accomplished.
Although we have succeeded in obtaining greater broadband access through the internet, we have not seen the sort of growth that we had envisaged in small businesses using information communication technology. So in a way, that has been a bit of a disappointment.
We must express our concerns and work collectively to address some of the negative effects of this dynamic ICT environment. I speak particularly of the negative impact of the internet, in particular, the issues of cybercrime and the invasion of people's privacy.
It is also well known that the drafters of the current Telecommunications Act, the original drafters, may have been a little too short-sighted. And I believe that there are some huge holes and gaps in the Telecommunications Act.
The technology is changing faster than we can keep pace with it. And usually, by the time we get ready with one set of legislation, the technology has changed again.
It is also unacceptable that 10 years into liberalization, we are yet to have number portability. Consumers should be able to change provider and retain the telephone numbers which they may have had for decades. Liberalization will not be complete without this capability. I challenge Ectel to work with the providers to have this in place with urgency.
Telecommunications it's advancing so rapidly that it would be strange that if you have a law 10 years ago that you don't have weaknesses in it today. And our job is to correct those weaknesses and to look ahead and to strengthen the institutions which we have established.
He advanced the principles on which Ectel was founded.
A significant achievement like the liberalization of the telecommunications sector in the Eastern Caribbean was made possible through the foresight, the conviction, and commitment of the pioneers. It is because of their unwavering dedication that we are today able to enjoy affordable, dependable, and modern telecommunications services. The pioneers took on what seemed an improbable task. They dismantled a telecommunications monopoly and nurtured a new regulatory regime into a model that is being studied by countries from around the world. The people of the islands are enjoying the benefits of the vision because of the commitment and hard work of those pioneers from the Ectel member states.